I mean, obviously by the time the New Hampshire primary actually arrived, it was really just two candidates at that point, Nikki Haley and Donald Trump on the Republican side.
Yeah.
And did you see anything from either candidate trying to convince you that they were better on the Second Amendment? Or do you know, did Nikki Haley's record come up at all? You obviously have a little bit of knowledge about Donald Trump's, but
no, and whether or not that was on purpose, by her people, or we just haven't kind of gone down that path with her. It certainly wasn't as like very much a casual, political watcher as far as like all that goes. Those were not the conversations that I heard, and those weren't the things that I had seen brought up, at least not on the regular. So whether or not they don't really want to get into it right now, maybe their concerns are more about border security in Israel. Maybe that's the focus right now, which I totally understand. I think it won't.
You're a gun store owner. You'd think maybe they would try to target you on that issue. They probably know that in their voter rolls,
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, and I don't know. I honestly don't know what the angle is, and as far as like why, maybe they've just seen in the past to be super pro 2A hasn't helped a ton. They know they want the voters for sure, which I get that, but I think making it a very strong part of their platform, potentially not politically beneficial if you're trying to gain voters from the other side. I don't know. You'd have to talk to their campaign managers for sure. Maybe. But I would like to. It would be nice if something like this was regimented, right? Like during the debates, you had to talk about one of the, each had to hit the 5 tentpole, items, whether it be economics and border control and Second Amendment and, whatever. And everyone has to say a little bit on each one, that we can kind of track them and hold them, hold them accountable. Said, hey, listen, you've been saying that this is what you're all about. Now you're heel turning. So what are we going to do? But, the debates are kind of what they dissolve into, and, the political, commercials and advertisements kind of spiral into whatever's getting people at the moment. So we are very lucky right now to a certain degree that we haven't had a major Sandy Hook or gun violence incident very recently. So it's maybe something that they're trying to avoid talking about. But
even the Trump campaign, right? I mean, you mentioned some of the negatives of his record. There's positives that he can point to with, especially with the appointment of the Supreme Court justices that were involved in the Brewing case, which is a landmark Second Amendment case. You didn't hear anything from his campaign either on that front.
No. And again, you'd think that that'd be something that they would definitely want to show you, as but at least not from my people. And if my people aren't reflecting it back to me and I'm not hearing it, then clearly that's not what they're campaigning on, at least not at the moment.
Yeah. So you didn't hear it directly, and you didn't hear any of your customers mentioning it either.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
It really seemed pretty absent to the entire there was a little bit with Ron DeSantis and his campaign, his super PAC very early on, but they didn't put a lot of effort into it. I guess it didn't make it up to New Hampshire, it seems.
Yeah.
He obviously wasn't still in the race by then, but are you comfortable sharing who you ended up voting for? Did you end up voting in the primary?
I did vote in the primary. I will abstain from saying who I voted for. Okay. Again, and that kind of goes back to my original point, where I want people to vote their values and their priorities. And, if I thought that it mattered that I said who I voted for, then I probably would definitely not say, because I am my person, and I want people to vote, their conscience and their values. I think that the totality of our individual ideas together are probably one of the greatest things. So, but yeah, it's not terribly eventful, and I don't think it'd impress anybody.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. President Biden, right? Now he's been very aggressive on trying to implement gun restrictions, even without new laws passed by Congress. He did manage to get a new gun law passed in 2022, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, right? But I think a lot of things people have been upset with in the gun community from the Biden administration have been more of his executive orders or the rulemaking that they've done through the ATF, things like the pistol brace ban, the ghost gun ban. There's
Yeah.
quite a lot of them. They sort of
Yeah.
follow that guide that the bump stock ban had laid down under President Trump. Now, a lot of them have run into serious trouble in court, but it's been something that has obviously upset a lot of gun rights advocates. They're not happy with President Biden's performance on the issue. Is that how you feel about that particular issue with President Biden as well? Or
yeah, I mean, yeah, decidedly so. I'm not surprised. I mean, President Biden has been very clear from the very beginning, from vice presidency into previous, his feelings on, firearms legislation, regulation. I think my biggest issue is that, well, one, I'm not expecting him to change for sure. And I think that has started to trickle down. We're seeing the ATF stuff with like the brace reclassifications, or however you want to argue that.
Right.
I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I mean, to a point, I think that's because the technology and the laws are starting to hit a weird juncture where, there's some of this stuff that hasn't been rewritten or hasn't been re-looked at in, 100 years. So some of these technology things are starting to become confusing, and we're obviously looking for clarification on both sides. So that's where I think some of this stuff starts to come to a head. But yeah, I'm not seeing anything positive from the Biden campaign. Certainly nothing that I support through the Second Amendment.
Yeah. So on that issue, you're obviously not happy with the president, but on other issues, it sounds like you might be more aligned with him. And as you mentioned, guns are not necessarily the only issue you care about in these elections. How do you view that with a general election matchup? Is the fact that you don't like his approach to gun policy disqualifying to you? Is the fact that maybe you don't like the Republicans and I don't know, some January 6th or some of the other issues that have happened with President Trump, is that disqualifying on that end, even if you like his gun? How are you looking at this?
Yeah, so I think the way that I look at it is that I think from a totality standpoint. And so while I don't like any of President Biden's history or stance on firearms regulation, I do have a lot of faith in the states to help protect, and our legislators to help protect. And there are layers that we can fight. And again, like the arm brace reclassification for the ATF, that's a good example. I mean, currently we're in much better territory. I mean, certainly I don't think the fight's over. There's a long way that has to go before it's over. But, we have recourse in a lot of these areas. I'm not saying that we have to, kick back and think that everything's going to be okay if we see another Biden presidency. But what I'm saying is that I think that being so firearms legislation regulation being so complex, I think we have a lot of other tools at our disposal rather than just putting, one person and saying that they're going to fix a problem or be the problem. Whereas, again, if I look at like someone like former President Trump, who, from a totality standpoint, is problematic in a lot of other areas for me. I may want to back him because he's a Second Amendment supporter. But there's a lot of other things that become issues for me at that point. So I think, again, not saying I want to vote for either. I would say that I think there's a lot more positives I see from Biden in other areas that are not Second Amendment for me. And that can sometimes become like an easier thought versus the other way around.